It's still thundering. It's still lightning. The situation hasn't changed.
Dr. Tony Evans talks about God's antidote for fear, love.
What love has produced is confidence where there was no confidence before. Strength where there was weakness before.
This is The Alternative with Dr. Tony Evans, author, speaker, senior pastor of Oak Cliff Bible Fellowship in Dallas, Texas, and president of the Urban Alternative. In the Bible, one of the most common things God and His angels say to people is, "Fear not." Yet somehow we manage to do it anyway. Today, Dr. Evans will teach us how to pay less attention to the things we're afraid of by focusing on something else. Let's turn to the book of 1 Timothy as we join him.
Today, there's a lot to be afraid of. We're fearful for our children growing up in this world where evil people are doing evil things to the most vulnerable of us in society. We're fearful for our health. You can see it when something even a little bit is wrong, the worry comes on. We can become certainly fearful financially, fear that the collapse in the culture is going to render us homeless or penniless. A lot to be afraid of today. Terrorism, of course, has created a great sense of fear, just insecurity all around. A lot to be afraid of. And yet, while there are many things that can create fear, cause fear, God does not want us to be owned by fear. He doesn't want us to walk around afraid. Anybody afraid? Anybody afraid? Come on, don't be scared. Instability, if don't even bother to look at your 401s and your 403s because you're going to be depressed. It's not going to look good, okay? The job statistics are out and there is no immediate end in sight or immediate cure around the corner. You could go crazy looking at the stock market every day if you have investments because one day it looks like it's going right and next day it collapses and it can make you unstable. And then, of course, it can breed fear. And then on top of all of that, there are the normal things in life, even if the economy's all right, that can make you insecure and afraid. So I just want to encourage you by the words of Paul to Timothy in 2 Timothy 1:7. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, timidity. Some versions have it. King James, I think, has fear, but of power and love and discipline. For God has not given us a spirit of timidity or fear, but He has given us one of power and love and discipline. The first observation I want you to realize is that fear, he says, is a spirit. God has not given us the spirit of fear. So let's get something straight. Fear is not merely an emotion. Now, fear is an emotion because you feel fear. You feel afraid. So it is an emotion, but it is an emotion precipitated by a spirit. God has not given us the spirit of fear, which means if you only look at fear as an emotion and never get around to looking at fear as a spirit, then you really don't address the cause, which means you're not getting to the cure. Fear, timidity, being apprehensive because your emotions are afraid, is a spirit. Because that is true, it's a spirit, not merely an emotion, not merely an attitude, not merely a disposition, then that means it must be addressed spiritually because it is a spirit. So the spiritual realm, then, affects our emotional realm. The spiritual realm affects our emotional realm. Or if I would flip it, if we were reading through the book of Philippians, Paul would say, rejoice in the Lord always, and again I say rejoice. The joy of the Lord is my strength. That's another emotion. Joy is a feeling, but Paul ties it to a spiritual connection to the Lord in order to have it. So therefore, our emotions, how we feel, which are very real, can be influenced by the spiritual realm. Now that's a very important connection, because if I can get a hold then of that spiritual realm, I can get a hold of my emotions. You see? If I can get a hold of the spirit that's causing the fear, then I can get a hold of the fear, not because I got the fear, but I got the spirit that caused it. The Lord has not given you. So this spirit that causes you to live in timidity, fear, and afraidness does not come from God. The Lord has not given us a spirit of fear. Now, why does he even tell Timothy this? Well, read the preceding verse. He says in verse 6, "For this reason I remind you to kindle afresh the gift of God which is in you through the laying on of hands. For God has not given us a spirit of timidity." Guess what? Timothy was not functioning on all cylinders. He had spiritual capacity and spiritual ability he was not using because of fear. Fear had limited Timothy's performance. Timothy was not maximizing his potential. Timothy was not becoming all that he was meant to be. Not because he didn't have it. He says the gift was bestowed upon you, but he didn't have it stirred up. In other words, it wasn't operative. It wasn't doing what it was supposed to do, and he wasn't being what he was supposed to be, because there was this spirit that was eroding him. Now, all Timothy may have felt was, I'm apprehensive, I'm insecure, and I'm afraid. And so he may have only been dealing with this on an emotional level, when Paul is saying to him, no, your spiritual gifting, what God has deposited in you, is being held back by a spirit that's causing your emotions to rule. The reason why I don't want you to be scared is because I don't want you or me to miss out on all that God has deposited. All that God, the gifting, the divine endowment. Let's review this. Every believer has a divine endowment, a deposit that has been placed in you by God for his use. This gifting, this ability that has been deposited. It's been a long time since I've said it, so some of you may not have heard it. When I was a boy in elementary school, I had a major speech impediment. I stuttered profusely. I had to work to get out words in elementary school. Now, I still have some remnants and reminders of that in my speech. But there was a deposit there that when it got stirred up, overrode what was making me so insecure to talk. I mean, if you stuttering to try to get out a word, it makes you timid to talk. You know, you don't want to talk. It's embarrassing that you can't finish a sentence or finish a word. But I came to learn there was a deposit that when that deposit got stirred up, it overrode the spirit that was ruling. So many of us that are ruled by emotions or by negative emotions are really being ruled by a spirit that is infiltrating those emotions and keeping us from fully expressing our spiritual endowment. That is limiting our spiritual authority, limiting all that God has deposited. Everybody in the room has potential beyond your imagination. Everybody under the sound of my voice has potential. What God has deposited in you, you can't use up in this lifetime. Somebody didn't hear that. What God has deposited in you, you can't use up in this lifetime. But there is a spirit out there that doesn't want you to stir it up. Because see, it's real. You become real dangerous when you discover what's down in there. When you discover you done got some other stuff that the spiritual realm is just stuffed up and stamped on, and yeah, he's used people to do it. He may have used your mama to do it, your daddy to do it. You know, he may have used other people to do it and mess up your old self-esteem and keep you suppressed from being all you were created and then in Christ recreated, redeemed to be. You can't even use all of that up. Timothy didn't know what he had going for him. So Paul had to work with him. He's very insecure. He's very unsure of himself. His confidence level is way down here, and he's afraid. He's timid. Paul says, stir up what God has deposited, because that thing that's causing it to be suppressed did not come from God. So Timothy's walking around thinking he's supposed to be this way. He's supposed to be insecure and timid and afraid and not being productive and, oh, maybe I can do something someday. No, you have deposited within you divine purpose and meaning and substance and significance and greatness and all of that. And you don't feel it because the wrong spirit is working. But it's not because it's not deposited. It's not because it's not deposited. And he wants him to know that. He doesn't want him to lose his spiritual authority due to intimidation. And here's how you know you're operating with the spirit of fear, and to use sports language, because you're living on defense. You're living on defense. In other words, you don't have the ball. You're not carrying the ball. You're not moving forward. You're always reacting to something else. See, a defense reacts to what the other team is doing. So they're busy. Defenses are busy, but they're busy responding because they don't have the ball. See, the beautiful thing about being on offense is because you have the ball, you get to call the play. You get to set the agenda. You get to set the direction because you have the ball. In Christ, that's what you have. And he says, don't be intimidated. God has deposited. You have the ball. He's deposited something within you. Now, the problem with God's deposit, not problem, but the reality of God's deposits is God's deposits come in seed form. You don't get the whole watermelon. You get the watermelon seed. All right? But in the watermelon seed is the watermelon. So there is much more in the seed than you can see. But the seed has to grow for you to see all that the seed is. So God's deposits are not finished products. Rarely does God start with the finish. Now, he starts with the finish from his perspective, but not from our linear perspective. We grow into this finished product. It is the enemy's job to keep that seed from growing. Because once that seed grows, it takes over the space that's been occupied by your fear.
Dr. Evans will talk about some specific ways we can protect and grow that seed inside us when he returns in a moment with part 2 of this message from his series, Living Above the Circumstances. It explains how to get more out of life, no matter what your situation may look like. And right now, for a short time longer, this entire 2-volume set is yours as our gift when you help us keep Tony's teaching on this station with a contribution of any size. We don't want you to miss out, so don't wait. Visit tonyevans.org today, where you can find all the details and make your request. Or call our 24-hour resource center at 1-800-800-3222. I'll repeat that information for you later after part 2 of today's lesson and this.
Coming to theaters April 29th and 30th.
The Bible makes it clear that you know when God has cursed a land, when its fathers are nowhere to be found.
Dr. Tony Evans says that what becomes of the next generation of men depends on what happens with this one.
It is a fool who says, I do not tell my children what to believe. Because if you don't, someone else will.
Kingdom Men Rising, a new film from Lifeway and Tony Evans that empowers men to be strong, courageous, loving leaders who can change the course of their kids' lives.
Our kids need to see men in their midst who love God and who love them.
Every man you know needs to see Kingdom Men Rising in theaters April 29th and 30th only. Featuring Tony Evans along with Troy Vincent, John Kitna, Tony Dungy, Tim Brown, Kirk Franklin, Lecrae, and many others. Visit TonyEvans.org for locations and showtimes.
See, a lot of people are trying to get rid of their fear by getting rid of their fear. You don't get rid of your fear by getting rid of your fear, because your fear not going anywhere. Especially if it's built a shack up in your soul, it's not going anywhere. What you must do is, he says, stir up what God has deposited. Okay? Expand what this deposit is so you crowd out the fear, the intimidation, and the insecurity. Stir it up. He says that spirit did not come from God. How do you do that? Well, look at the end of verse 7. He says God has given you something else. He's given you a spirit of power, of love, and of discipline. He says you got to get 3 other spirits working. 3 other spirits working to counteract the spirit of intimidation, whether you call it fear or insecurity or apprehension or however it's manifesting itself. First of all, you have a spirit of power. Why do you have a spirit of power? You have a spirit of power because of divine resources. Every believer has been given divine resources, spiritual resources that are powerful. That is, when used. Spiritual resources are powerful when used. He says we have been given divine resources. 1 Corinthians 10, verse 4 and 5, the tearing down of the wrong thing so that the right thing can be built up. You and I have been gifted with the Spirit because of spiritual resources. So you have the equipment, if you will, to not succumb to the spirit of fear. You have the equipment in terms of power. Secondly, he says you have love, spirit of love. In fact, 1 John 4, 17 and 18 says, perfect love casts out fear. Those of us who parents have experienced this. Your child is afraid, it's dark or it's thunder and lightning, and they are afraid. Their emotions are controlling them. Why? Because the atmosphere, it's either dark or thunder and lightning, what happened, is now dictating what the emotions are feeling. And then a loving mother or a loving father goes in, slides under the cover with their terrified child, embraces them, hugs them, kisses them. It's going to be all right. Mommy's here. Daddy's here. Rock them. And all of a sudden, screams and insecurities become rest, relaxation, and sleep, even though the scenario that brought you in there has not changed. It's still dark. It's still thundering. It's still lightning. The situation hasn't changed, but love has cast fear out. Love has removed the insecurity. Love has removed intimidation. What love has produced is confidence where there was no confidence before. Strength where there was weakness before. Perfect love, mature love, cast fear out. Many people are afraid because they have never been loved. Did you hear me? Many people are afraid, insecure, because they've never been loved. But if they were ever loved in a mature way, then it casts fear out. Fear and perfect love can't hang out in the same neighborhood. Perfect love casts out fear. And then he says, and God has given us discipline. Some versions translated a sound mind. A sound mind. This has to do with a way of thinking. And 1 Corinthians 10 will tell us more about that again. A sound mind or a disciplined mind is the mind that has determined that God's view on a matter is the correct view. A disciplined mind, or a sound mind, that is a mind that is thinking correctly, has said that God's view on a matter is the correct way to think about that matter. And the result of that sound thinking, combined with mature love, combined with spiritual resources, is boldness. That's why Paul can say in verse 8, therefore do not be ashamed of the testimony. Why? Because he was hesitant. He was fearful. He was insecure. He says that insecurity doesn't come from God. That's a spirit. That's a wrong spirit. That's an evil spirit. That doesn't come from God. God has given you something that you don't have to be ashamed of. Many of the circumstances we face that make us afraid, we have no control over. The things you have control over, you should do something about. Many of this stuff you don't have any control over. You have control of the weather, whether a hurricane comes. You don't have to say about that. You can't control whether the world has an economic collapse. You can control your finances, but you can't control the whole world. You can't control, everything that's going to happen around you. So if you're living with the spirit of fear, then all you got to do is keep the news on and you will stay fearful. Because there's enough going wrong to keep you feeling that way. And what you do, or what we do, is we give this spirit that has made itself at home in us, it's a magnet to attract anything that'll keep it alive. And since there's always something to keep it alive, you'll always be in this fear mode. But he says that's not the deposit God gave you. He gave you gifting. He gave you endowment. He gave you a supernatural capacity. And if you will fill that with the spiritual resources, if you'll fill that with mature love, if you'll fill that with God-like thinking, then you will not be ashamed. You will be secure and you will maximize your spiritual potential. You have more in you than you could ever use up in this lifetime. Now, it may have been suppressed, it may have been reduced, it may have been limited because it may be stuck in seed form. But it doesn't have to continue to be like that. Stir up, that means you must make the decision. God will put in the seed, you must water it, grow it, develop it. He will give it. But just like a farmer, God gives the seeds that the farmer plants, but the farmer must plant them. That is, use spiritual resources.
Dr. Evans will come back in a moment to wrap up our program with a word of prayer. First, though, a quick reminder about that special offer I mentioned earlier. If you can help us continue this broadcast by making a donation of any amount, large or small, we'll say thanks by sending you all 15 CDs in our current series, Living Above the Circumstances. This is a limited-time offer, so don't put it off. Drop by our website, tonyevans.org, where you can get all the details and make the arrangements. Or give us a call at 1-800-800-3222. Staff members are standing by 24/7 to help you with resource requests. Again, that's 1-800-800-3222. Dr. Evans says the only way to really get rid of our fear is to crowd it out and replace it with something bigger and stronger. We'll learn more about that tomorrow. Right now, he's back to lead us in prayer.
Let's pray. Father, I thank you for the word of God that goes forth through this ministry and for every ear that hears it. I pray that you will use the word in the life of each person individually so that they know that they are hearing from you and are transformed by what they hear. I pray that that transformation touches them at their place of need. Wherever they're hurting, struggling, wherever they're in pain, or wherever they're celebrating, may you be the center of that. And may they be able to say, because of the word that they've heard and because of the true God that they're interacting with right now, that you have showed up and shown off on their behalf, doing good by them no matter what their circumstances happen to be. Thank you for how you're going to touch every listener today in your own special way. In Jesus' name, amen.
The Alternative with Dr. Tony Evans is brought to you by the Urban Alternative and is made possible by the generous contributions of listeners like you.